Hey there, Dango Stu here. In today's video we're going to start putting together the pistons for the Evinrude 150. So we've got these Wiseco Forge pistons we're putting in this, and these pistons are separated into port and starboard banks. So I'll quickly just show you over on the block how we determine which side we're doing and why it's important to use the right one. So here's our engine block. This is the base that goes onto the leg, and this is the top where the flywheel goes. This is the back of the motor. So these are our starboard cylinders, and then over here are our port side cylinders. If we come around here, another thing we need to know is what's the exhaust side, which is in through here. The reason we need to know that, and the reason these pistons are divided port and starboard, is that it's really important that the rings don't catch on these exhaust ports or inlet ports or anything like this. So both sets of pistons are designed, they have a side that needs to face the exhaust side, and that way they're guaranteed that they're not going to interfere with any of these ports. The piston I'm going to do next is number 4. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and then 4 over here. So number 4 is a port side piston. In the kits for these pistons, you get some new rings, piston itself, a new gudgeon pin or a new wrist pin, and in here we also just have some clips that hold the wrist pin in. On the top here, you'll see it confirms there that it's a port side piston, and this is the side here that has to go towards the exhaust. The other thing we need to know is which side of the conrod faces the flywheel. So we've got this side of the piston facing the exhaust, then this conrod can go this way or it can go that way. And what we need to have is there's a little hole up under there, you can see, and that's only on one side, and that side has to face up towards the flywheel. The next thing I do is just open these little clips that hold the wrist pin in, because I'm going to put one straight up on the bottom side of the piston. By the bottom side, the outboard runs in this orientation, the holes here going towards the flywheel, the exhaust sides facing towards the centre of the motor. So this is the bottom one here. So I'm going to put a little clip in there to start with, and I'll show you how I do that. They can be a little tricky. There's a little half circle here that comes out from this main hole for the pin, and you want the open end to go opposite that. So I'm going to push this opposite end in and down. Once you get it in far enough, it'll kind of sit there, and you can actually then tilt it. So once I've got it into a bit of a midpoint, I can start to tilt it, and I want to line the tips up here with the groove inside. Once it's sort of aiming in the right direction, I can give it a bit of a push forward until it's in the groove. Then I just use a screwdriver or something to push the back section down. Until it sort of clips in. These can go flying everywhere, so another time it's a really good idea to be wearing some safety glasses if you're dealing with these. Now this clips in, it helps with a few things. Obviously it stops this pin falling all the way through when I assemble it, but it also reminds me that this is the top of the piston, and that the side of the conrod with the hole in it has to now go towards the side that doesn't yet have the clip in, the side I'm going to push the pin through. So I'm going to put this piston aside for a second, and we're going to start arranging the roller bearings that need to go in the little end here. The first thing I do though is actually just give these a bit of a clean up. So I'm just going to get a really clean piece of rag and then use a bit of brake cleaner and just clean out this end of the conrod. There's 28 rollers for each little end bearing on this motor, so I'm just going to get this wrist pin out now that I've got them lined up, and I'll show you how I like to install them. There's a few different ways. Some people are quite good at sort of using the pin, putting a bit of grease on it and rolling them on and getting them quite neat. I find it's a great way to start, but I usually miss quite a few and get the spacing a bit wrong. But it's a really good head start. It lets you sort of get things roughly in position, and you can always drop a handful in as you need to. To get ready to do this, there's a few things I'm going to do. First thing is just put some of this needle roller bearing assembly grease onto the centre of the pin. Just going to put a blob on and just smear it around the outside. You don't want too much, but at the same time, a really thin coat and the needles just won't stick to it. So you need enough to sort of do its job for this assembly phase. Then I'm going to put a bit more of this grease on the little end of the conrod. And then I'm also going to get this can, which has just a bit of clean new 2-stroke oil in it. And I'm just going to put a little bit in the piston. Where the pin's going to slide through. I probably should have mentioned earlier too, you need to keep things as clean as you can doing this job. You don't want to have sort of grit on your hands and then wiping that into the grease and all that sort of thing. It's just going to do damage once the motor starts up. So clean grease, clean oil, clean rag, bench, everything as good as you can get it. So now I'm just going to run the wrist pin along, just see how many we can sort of pick up and get in position. And then what I like to do is just slip the washer on the bottom here and then just let them rest against that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is actually slide the conrod on so I can position them. But if you've got a big gap somewhere, I like to just get 1 or 2 in there just to help keep the conrod sort of centered. So we'll carefully drop, oh, hang on, one at the back, sorry. Let's drop down. So we'll drop this conrod on. Just keeping an eye then for any wayward pins. One of them had actually slid out a little bit, so you've just got to line it back up. You'll have gaps here still obviously, but it's pretty straightforward now just to drop these remaining rollers in. If you have any problem getting them in, if for whatever reason things feel a little bit bound up, I find just rotating the pin a little bit tends to get everything squared again quite nicely. Then just find the biggest gap, rotate a bit. Just means you never actually have to put any force on anything. You should never, pretty much in the whole assembly stage, never have to force anything. If it feels like it's taking too much effort, stop and just see what's wrong, because you'll probably just end up scratching something if you do try and force it. Once you've got them all in like this, I'm going to slide the wrist pin out towards the washer. So the washer's what stops the pins from being pulled with it, and you end up with them all like that, your rollers. Now we've got all the rollers in like this, it's time to put the conrod into the piston and then push the wrist pin through. So this is where our orientation gets really important again. So I've got the clip in this side, so I know this is the top towards the flywheel, and I've got my washer here, or a spacer, and the hole on the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is hold this in, slide our pin through, when I went to put that together then, one of the rollers got pushed up, so you kind of have to pull it out, start again, you know, it's no big deal. But the reason I mention it, rather than just editing it out, is it's occurred to me that this is actually a little bit harder than it was when I did the original ones. And I think it's because today is a much hotter day. It's actually about 40 degrees today. So I think this grease is a little bit runnier than it was when I did the first ones, because of the heat. So I'm thinking I might even try putting this in the fridge and just seeing if I can get it to hold those pins a little bit better instead of being as liquid as it is today. All right, back where we were, take two. I'll try and find a better camera angle as I slot this in, but I'll just talk you through it quickly because it's a little bit hard to show. There's no great mystery though. All I'm going to be doing is pulling this wrist pin out, pushing the conrod in, then sliding the wrist pin in through the piston, through the conrod. Then once it's in, I'll slot this second washer with the flat side facing outwards onto the end, then continue to push it all the way through. And then we're home and hosed. Everything's locked in and it can't fall apart at all then. So pull the pin out. So now what I'm going to do is have the pin heading this way, then look down through the top hole when everything's lined up. I've started pushing that pin through. A few of the rollers have jumped up a little bit, but that's no problem. Then what I need to do is get everything down far enough that I can get that top washer in with the flat side facing out. Then once everything's lined up, you can sort of look down from the top end. As it all gets lined up, push the pin all the way through. That pin's now going to hit the clip that I put in originally. Now all I've got to do is put this final clip to hold the wrist pin in from the other side, and the open end goes opposite to that little sort of half circle cutout. What I'm aiming to do this time, because I can't push it in sort of to its pivot point and then twist it because the pin's in the way, I'm really just aiming to put it in at an angle and get these two ends to try and get into the slot. Once they're in the slot, that'll hold it, and then I can just sort of try and push the back down. It is tricky though. I will actually wear my safety glasses for this because they do go flying everywhere. They're pretty nasty. The two ends here, if you can see, I don't know if that's focusing properly, are sort of locked into the groove. So now I'm going to take this back section here where that cutout is and just push it down till it clicks in. Done. So there we are. Piston on the conrod. Next thing we're going to do is put the compression rings in. Now when I got this block back from the engineer, he said it's pretty much good to reassemble in the sense that the bearings are all good. He said there's no bearing damage. They're actually, in his exact words, they're pretty bulletproof. He also said that he couldn't machine the block until the pistons arrived, which was one of the delays. And he said the block's been machined to perfectly match these pistons, so they're pretty much right to go, and that included the rings. But ring gap's pretty important, and it's a interesting thing to show. So what we're going to do is just double check the ring gap before we put the rings onto the pistons. The instructions for this piston say that the ring gap you should have, as a general rule, is 0.04 of an inch per inch of bore. So I measured these pistons and they're 3.627 inches across, and 0.04 of an inch is roughly 0.1 of a millimetre. So I'm looking at having 0.36 of a millimetre gap. Now it was actually 0.37 roughly. Of the feeler gauges I've got, the closest I have is a 0.38 millimetre, so within 0.01 of a millimetre, pretty close. So what I'm going to do is put the ring for this piston into the cylinder this piston will be going into. Then we're going to get it flush using the piston itself, and then we'll measure the gap. So here are our rings, only 2 rings for a 2-stroke because there's no oil control ring. These also have a top and a bottom on them. First thing I'm going to do though is clean the cylinder bore for the piston we're doing, because they all still have a little bit of this paste from being machined, and that's kind of catastrophic. You really want to get rid of that. So I'm going to clean it even just to check the rings, but then I'll also be giving the whole block a thorough clean before we install the pistons. So just a quick wipe there to get any sort of residue from machining off. I'm also just going to put a cloth, just a little bit of 2-stroke oil. Then all I'm going to do is pop this ring in. Grab the piston we just built. You can do this at any stage. You could do it before the piston had the conrod on, no big deal. But what that means now is it's gone down an inch or so. is that we know that the ring is sitting square in the bore. Now the ring's in the bore, I'm just going to take my 0.38 feeler gauge and just slide it in the gap. And I can just feel a tiny bit of resistance. I mean, you might argue that that means that this is the gap in it's 0.01 of a millimetre too big, but I reckon that's pretty good. Common way to put these rings on is just to use a set of ring expanding pliers, which you literally just put in the edge, and as you squeeze them, they open it up a little bit. But you can also just wind them on. These go on really easily. You don't have to stretch them or deform them very much at all to get them on. You can sort of just sit them around the top. Something else I should point out. Just here you can see there's a little dowel in the groove for the piston ring, and that is what stops the ring rotating on the piston. And we want that dowel to go where this gap is here. So all I'm going to do is start at that little dowel. And pop it in like that. You can see it didn't involve stretching it, twisting it, reefing it at all really. It goes in quite simply. I started with the top one because I'm going to put the next one down over the top, and it actually goes in easier if there's something here. Even though it's something to go over, it means that you don't sort of drop in that groove, you skim over it. Also, see the end of this ring's got that sort of shape to it, and that's the shape, that bevel that wraps around the dowel, and that's why this side, or one of the reasons, that side's marked as the top. So make sure you also put the rings on the right way around. It's not just the grease that's melting, I think it's me too today, so sorry about that. Alright, so that's the basic procedure of putting the pistons together. So just to go back a little bit, the critical things are that you've got a piston for the port side of the motor on the port side of the motor, that the side that's labelled exhaust is facing the exhaust ports, and that the conrod has the oil hole facing the flywheel. They're kind of essential things. Obviously 28 rollers all need to be in, and when you put these clips in, just make sure they actually have clipped right in. It's easy to sort of put them in, think they're in, and then suddenly you give them an extra little push with the screwdriver and you hear them click and you know they're really well seated. So just double check all of those. Doesn't hurt once you finish too, just have another look back at it. Go, are my rings the right way round? Is everything in the right orientation? Sometimes you're a little bit busy doing the job, and having that check afterwards, you can pick up mistakes. So it's never too late to undo these. You know, you can undo them as quickly as you put them together, or quicker than you put them together. I've run out of time tonight, but I'm going to finish these pistons, and then next video we'll start sliding them into the block and putting the crankshaft back in and all that kind of stuff. But before we go, I'll just quickly show you the sort of sealants and seals that I've got. Half just to show you what we need, and half in case you've got any particular comments on some of them, because I'm getting a bit of a mixed story about some of these sealants, and I'd be curious to see if anyone's got any strong opinions on it. So what it says you need here is a cleaning solvent. I think that's relatively common. I'll probably use some sort of acetone or brake cleaner or something. Then it said you need OMC gasket sealing compound. And what I'm going to use for that is this Hylamar, which is essentially a spray, and it's for the gasket that goes between the leg and the power head. Then it said you need Gel Seal 2, which, as far as I can tell, is Loctite 518. I originally got this one through Evinrude, but I then later on found a 518 that came in this sort of syringe, which I think is just going to be easier to use. So Gel Seal 2, as far as I know, is this Loctite product, and that's what we're going to be using. Then it talked about, so outboard lubricant, that's fine, we've got that. A Moly lube, so I've got an assembly liquid Moly lube as well. Then there was the needle bearing assembly grease, which I got through Evinrude, just to make sure we're using the right thing there, because I don't want any bearing trouble. Then there was the Lock-Quick primer, which appears to be this Loctite 7471. It's actually even called Lock-Quick on it. So that's what we're going to be using as our primer. Then probably one of the more contentious ones came in. It was the RTV. So it said GE RTV adhesive, and this is what you use on the cylinder head. So I went up to the local bearing place and I found this one, the both 3Bond brand, which is a high temp RTV silicon gasket maker. 3Bond also make this one, which is 1207B, and apparently it's stronger and has a higher temperature rating. It's rated up to 330 degrees Celsius. So this is what I'm thinking I'm going to use, but I'd be curious to see if anyone's had any experience with these products and has any thoughts on it before I do it. I'd rather find out now than later. So this is what I'm thinking of using for the RTV, but please feel free to comment if you know better. What I also have here is the absolute complete powerhead gasket set from Evinrude. So this is pretty much everything from crank seals. I think it's actually even got a cowling seal, seals from behind the carbs, the actual O-rings that go around the pistons, pretty much everything we need. So it's all in here. So we've got all our seals, and these are the sealants I've got. Now the other one it said is an OMC Permatex number 2. I've ordered a Permatex number 2 because apparently it's not that common. There's a 1 which is the sort of brushable, and oh no, I think it was 1 was the shellac hard one, and 3 was brushable, or vice versa, something like that. But 2 was a little bit less common. Anyway, I've ordered that, and that should be here too, and that's the complete list. So I think we're pretty much ready to go for the assembly. All right, well that's about it for today. Oh, one other thing I did want to say is a few of us from the workshop are heading down to Tasmania next week to go and see the Wooden Boat Show. And we were hoping to do a little bit of fishing while we're down there. None of us really know any good spots for fishing, so if you happen to live in Tasmania, around the Hobart area, I mean, not that it's a big state, we can kind of drive anywhere, and you're keen to show us some of your favourite spots, it'd be great to hook up. So send me a message if you're keen, and I'll get in touch and we'll try and organise it. All right, well take care, and I'll see you when we pick up this project again. The video for the weekend may be an unrelated gearbox one I'm thinking of putting up, so don't worry, we will pick this project up again when we get back, so there may be a few videos in between, that's all. All right, see ya.